In this video, I'll be demonstrating different ways to decorate and add texture to your pottery with slip. These techniques can be applied to hand-built, wheel-thrown, or sculptural work. Most of my demonstrations will be on these pots I threw on the potter's wheel. If you're interested in seeing the full process of throwing a cup on the wheel, check out my channel to see my other video offerings. To prepare the slip, I'm filtering it through a mesh strainer to create a nice, smooth consistency. If you're making slip, it's easiest to mix from bone-dry clay scraps, adding water and straining it. This first technique I'll be sharing is actually very simple and effective to create a natural tactile texture to any clay surface. I'm using my finger to dab the slip onto the pot. It's important that the pot isn't too dry when applying slip so that it adheres nicely. Or it can be applied with a paintbrush to achieve a slightly different texture. You can be very intentional with the application and control how the slip stands up and stands out. Once applied, I let it dry and gently brush off the surface so that it's not sharp and it feels smooth on your hand. This technique has a wide application that can also be used as a sculptural element to create details onto your work. Here I'm using slip to sculpt the hair onto some of my figurative pieces. It's amazing how realistic detail can be brought into a piece with a simple slip application, like creating hair that is generally difficult to sculpt. I've also used this technique to create a natural skin texture on my octopus sculptures. I scooped up the slip with a sponge and applied it directly to the pot. I recommend experimenting with different tools to create variation in textures. Some applications you'll have more control over the result. Once the piece sets up, it's great to smooth it out with a brush for a smoother finish. And now we'll be adding color to the slips. Incorporating colored slips into your palette can open up a lot of creative doors. I'm mixing mason stain with a little water to ensure that the powder is distributed evenly, and adding slip to the mix. I recommend experimenting with different ratios. I mixed 4 to 10% mason stain to the slip and made a variety of colors to experiment with. I find these little jars to be a great way to store the slip for later use. I'll be using this colored slip as a base for Sgraffito. It's important to apply the slip evenly to ensure that it has a thick coat. Sometimes I apply 2 coats to be sure that the slip covers the surface evenly. I'm creating a spectrum of color that will serve as my base to carve through. I'm using a small pointed loop tool to create my Sgraffito design. I recommend drawing something that's easy for you to draw. When carving, it's good to draw with fluid strokes so that the lines are smooth. I'm drawing a simple flower inspired by henna designs. I was a henna artist for many years and can draw these patterns with ease. I find that henna patterns translate to Sgraffito really nicely. By creating thin and thick lines to separate the design from the background. You want the pot to be leather hard. If it's too wet, the clay will clump off and stick to itself, and if it's too dry, you're more likely to breathe clay particles, which nobody wants. My slip wasn't as even as I hoped, so I smoothed it out with a ruler before beginning my next piece, which also created a nice variation of color that overlapped, kind of like watercolors. A compass is a great tool for mapping out a round design and to create even spacing for your design. Something I've learned from drawing henna designs is how to lay out a pattern in a way that stands out and has breathing room. The way that I approach that is by creating lines that separate different design patterns with thin and thick lines. This can be accomplished with different tools, like a ballpoint tool that I'm using. Check out the link in the description to find some of the tools I'm using in this video. Simple patterns repeating can become very elaborate by adding more detail. A round loop tool is a great tool to add petal details and accent the design border. With the same loop tool, I'm removing some of the design to create negative space and texture. I'm drawing a paisley design that is one of the most common henna designs. It symbolizes good fortune, life, and fertility, and is a design that can be traced back over 2,000 years. Another great way to use colored slips is to paint with it to accent your design. It can be applied before bisque firing and is a great base for other glazing applications. Slip trailing is a great way to add texture and decoration to your pottery. After mapping out a circular pattern with my compass, I'm applying slip with a bottle. You want the consistency of the slip to be like a thick cream. If it's too thin, the slip will drip or not stay raised up when dry. When it's too thick, it's difficult to apply and hard on your hand. I'm drawing an 8-pointed mandala pattern starting from the center with a combination of lines and dots. It's easiest to eyeball the petals with the circle I traced on there. And then I trace the circles to frame the design. Creating lines that start off thick and taper can give a nice appearance, which can be controlled by starting with more pressure on the bottle and letting up as you draw the line. This is so similar to applying henna, I feel right at home. That's the beauty of exploring other art mediums, because they can overlap and offer a new take on a material. And adding another color of slip with dots. And here's the final result of this piece. Stay tuned for some extra slip trailing tips. I'm going to demonstrate another design using the same approach by utilizing the compass to create guidelines and building the design out from the center. Keeping in mind that when there is spacing between the design, by accentuating the circles, the design will look more cohesive and distinct. With the slip application, it's important to keep a steady hand and even pressure with a fluid motion so that the lines are all even. Oftentimes, elaborate designs are simple patterns repeating, and it's more about consistency and shape so that they all match up symmetrically. The technique for creating a dot is to press the slip out of the bottle and have it pool, then lift the tip straight up. Dots add a great texture once the pots are fired, can be applied in infinite patterns. Here's an example of adding dots to one of my carved geometric designs, adding a great texture and accentuating the design. Here are examples of a few extra pieces I made using all the techniques I just shared. If you'd like to see how these cups turned out after I glazed and fired them, I'll be posting that video soon. Let me know in the comments if this video was helpful, inspiring, or if there's something you'd like to see me create in the future. Please like, subscribe, and share with a friend.